The black sedan rolled to a stop beneath the crystal-lit canopy of the Imperial Hotel, and Elias Warren stepped out into the cold Chicago night before the engine had fully settled. He moved the way he always did, deliberately, quietly, without waste. He walked around to the passenger side, opened the rear door, and stood back. That was the job. He knew exactly what it was, and he had never needed it explained to him. The Imperial was dressed for the occasion. White columns wrapped in winter orchids, a red carpet that swallowed footsteps, photographers jockeying for position along both sides of the entrance. Monroe Urban Mobility was celebrating its new green transit initiative, $160 million in projected contracts, a night of champagne and mutual congratulation for the people who had never once ridden a city bus. Adelaide Monroe emerged from the back seat the way she always emerged from things first, and ahead of everyone else. She was 34 years old, the youngest CEO in the company's history, and she wore that fact the way she wore everything, without visible effort, and with the quiet authority of someone who had never seriously considered the possibility that a room might not belong to her. Her gown was the color of slate. Her jewelry was understated, and cost more than Elias made in 4 months. She did not look at him when she stepped out. That was not unusual. What happened next was, a young man near the entrance, Finn Mercer, 21 years old in his manner if not his age, the son of a senior shareholder, called out something across the crowd. He had been drinking, his laughter was too loud, and he was pointing toward the sedan, toward the crease in the back seat that bore the faint stain of spilled red wine from an earlier passenger. He said something about standards. He said something about what you could expect when you hired from the bottom. Adelaide was already tense. The evening's audit reports had been sitting on her desk all week like something she could not bring herself to open. The photographers were watching. The board members were watching. She needed to appear in control of every variable, including the ones that did not matter. And somehow, the sight of a driver in a worn suit standing beside a slightly imperfect car became the variable she chose. She looked at Elias directly for the first time. Her voice was not cruel in the way that screaming is cruel. It was worse than that. It was composed. It was the voice of someone who believed completely in what they were saying. "A driver like you," she said, clearly enough that the nearest cluster of guests could hear, "only needs to remember where he stands." The laughter that followed was not universal, but it was loud enough. A few people looked away. Most did not. Elias said nothing for a moment. There was a child sitting in the small staff waiting area just inside the lobby doors, his daughter Lily, 8 years old, her dark braids slightly undone from a long evening of waiting. The regular sitter had canceled an hour before his shift began. He had nowhere else to bring her. She was watching through the glass. He saw her face before he said anything. "I apologize for any inconvenience, ma'am," he said quietly. That made it worse for the crowd. They laughed again, the way people laugh when they mistake restraint for weakness. Finn Mercer said something else. Adelaide had already turned away, and the door swallowed her whole, along with the chandeliers and the string quartet and every person in the city who would never know what it cost a man to swallow something like that in front of his child. Elias turned back toward the car. His right hand found the keys in his pocket and closed around them slowly. And the pressure he applied was the kind a person applies when they are keeping something inside themselves that would otherwise come out in a way they could not take back. His knuckles went white, then white again, then pale. He breathed once through his nose. He walked to get Lily. The drive home took 22 minutes. Lily sat in the back and said nothing for the first 10, which was how he knew she had seen everything. "You're not going to talk about it," she said finally. "It was not a question. There's not much to say. You didn't do anything wrong. I know that." She looked out the window at the city scrolling past, the lit office towers and the closed diners and the long empty stretches between neighborhoods that nobody ever photographed. "Some people think money means they can talk to anyone any way they want," she said. She sounded like she was reciting something she had worked out on her own over a long time. "Some people do think that," he said, "but you're better than her." He did not answer immediately. He watched the road. "Go to sleep, Lily Bird." Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in a neighborhood that did not appear in any magazine's guide to Chicago living. It was clean. It was organized. The books on the shelf were arranged not for decoration, but because Elias and Lily both read them. There were drawings on the refrigerator, and a small corkboard in the kitchen where Lily pinned things she found interesting, a news clipping about deep-sea fish, a photograph of a bridge under construction, a hand-lettered note that said, "Times ask more questions." Asterisk. Elias settled her into bed and stood in the hallway for a while after the light went out. In the morning, he woke before 6. He made 2 eggs and toast, packed her lunch in the blue container she preferred, and walked her to school in the cold. He was back in the apartment by 8:15. He slept until noon, ate a bowl of soup standing at the counter, and checked the transit industry news on his phone the way he had every day for 3 years, not because he needed to, but because some habits were harder to leave behind than others. There was a locked drawer in the small desk by the window. He passed it without opening it, the way he always did. And then, at 2:47 in the afternoon, an email arrived from the legal department of Monroe Urban Mobility. The subject line read, asterisk, "Notice of confidential attendance requirement. Elias Warren priority classification." Asterisk. He read it 3 times. The 4th time, he opened the locked drawer. Inside was a manila folder, old enough that the tab had softened at the corners. On the label, written in handwriting that was not his own, asterisk, Rosalind, asterisk. He sat down in the chair and opened it. Rosalind Warren had been 29 years old when she joined the original Monroe Urban Mobility team as a systems design consultant. That was before the glass tower, before the board of directors, before the company had a logo or a legal address. There was a man at the center of it, then George Monroe, the founder, 60 years old and still sharp enough to know what he did not know. What he did not know was how to build a routing architecture that could scale across a city the size of Chicago. Rosalind knew. She worked alongside George for 2.5 years. She did not have an office. She worked from a converted conference room with paper, maps pinned to the walls, and a coffee maker that broke twice a month. She built the foundational model that the company still used, in modified form, to coordinate its entire fleet. George knew what that was worth. He told her so, more than once. But the company grew, and the people who arrived with the growth were not the same as the people who had been there at the beginning. The Monroe family expanded its presence. Attorneys appeared, shareholder agreements were drawn, the names on the organizational chart multiplied faster than the principals beneath them. Rosalind saw it coming. She had told Elias once, sitting at the kitchen table in their first apartment, that she was not afraid of the company getting large. She was afraid of what large companies did to the people who had helped build them. "They don't fire you," she had said. "They just stop mentioning your name." George Monroe had not been willing to let that happen. Quietly, without announcement, he had created a parallel legal structure, a trust that held a protected stake tied to Rosalind's foundational contributions. The conditions under which it would activate were specific. If the company's leadership deviated materially from the principles of its founding charter, particularly through financial misconduct or systematic corruption, the stake would transfer to her designated guardian. If Rosalind was no longer living, it would pass to the legal guardian of her surviving family. Rosalind had died of an aggressive and merciless illness when Lily was 4 years old. Elias had closed the drawer and kept it closed for 4 years after that. He had received letters from law firms during that time. He had not opened most of them. He had not wanted whatever was inside them. He had wanted to drive his car, collect his daughter from school, and sleep without dreaming about conference rooms and stock certificates. The email on his phone said his attendance was required the following morning. The word times priority times appeared twice. He sat in the chair for a long time with the folder in his hands. Adelaide Monroe walked into the 48th floor the next morning with the particular efficiency of someone who ran entirely on forward motion and had not yet learned how to stop and look behind her. She had been awake since 5. She had reviewed the preliminary audit summary, replied to 11 emails, and made 2 decisions about the green transit project before her assistant had finished brewing the coffee. This was how she operated. If you moved fast enough, you stayed ahead of whatever was accumulating in the space behind you. In the elevator, she noticed 2 of her senior managers, looking away when the doors opened. She filed the observation and did not ask about it. Bernice Hale was waiting in a small conference room adjacent to the legal wing, a room that Adelaide associated with difficult conversations. Bernice was 52 and had the face of someone who had outlasted 4 rounds of executive leadership and intended to outlast several more. She did not waste words. She rarely wasted anything. "I've asked someone else to join us this morning," Bernice said. She did not explain further. Adelaide sat down and straightened the legal pad in front of her. "A labor filing?" "Not exactly." Elias came through the door 4 minutes later in a gray jacket over a collared shirt. He had not dressed to impress anyone, and Adelaide recognized immediately that this was not an act of carelessness, but something else. A man who was comfortable enough in his own dimensions that he did not require the confirmation of other people's approval. She experienced a brief and ungenerous flicker of irritation at the sight of him. Bernice set a sealed folder on the table between them. "What I'm about to present is preliminary," she said. "Full verification will take several more days. But given certain triggers identified in the external audit, I'm legally required to disclose this now." She paused. "The company has been operating under a dormant trust instrument established by George Monroe in the early years of the organization. That instrument contains conditions for activation. Based on the audit's preliminary findings, those conditions have been met." Adelaide looked at the folder. "What conditions?" "Systemic financial misconduct," Bernice said. "Specifically, the structuring of assets through shell entities in a way that violates the company's founding charter." The room was very quiet. Adelaide looked at Elias. "The instrument names a beneficiary," Bernice continued. "In the event that the primary named party, Rosalind Warren, is deceased, her designated guardian assumes standing." She opened the folder. "That person is Elias Warren, currently employed as a contract driver by Monroe Urban Mobility's subsidiary Fleet Division." Adelaide heard the sentence and understood each individual word, and still could not make them cohere into something that connected to the man, sitting across from her with his hands flat on the table, and his expression absolutely neutral. "There has to be a clerical error," she said. "There is not," Bernice said. Elias, for his part, was not performing calm. He was genuinely stunned, though in a different direction, not because he doubted his connection to the trust, but because he had never fully understood how large it was. He looked at Bernice. "What exactly are we talking about?" 50% of the company's founding equity," Bernice said. "With full legal standing, pending verification." Adelaide looked at the wall. She had the expression of someone from whom all the air had been removed without warning. "I'll need this kept confidential until verification is complete," Bernice said. "Both of you." When Elias left the room, Adelaide remained seated. She watched the door close. For the first time in as long as she could clearly remember, the floor beneath her felt less certain than it had the moment before. 2 days later, Elias was driving the late route when he heard something he was not supposed to hear. He had been tracking anomalies for months, not systematically, not with any particular goal in mind, but the way a person who has spent years paying attention to the machinery around them cannot help but notice when something in that machinery begins to run wrong. There were vehicle dispatch orders for routes that carried no verified passengers. There were fuel and maintenance invoices that did not match the mileage logs. There were signatures on authorization forms that appeared in different handwriting each time. He had noted these things in a small document on his phone that he had never sent to anyone. In the service corridor, behind the ballroom of the Whitmore Center, where Monroe Urban Mobility was hosting a mid-season stakeholder preview, Elias stopped to tie his shoelace near a ventilation grate. The voices on the other side belonged to Clinton Voss, the company's chief financial officer, a man with a voice like polished wood and the ethics of a balance sheet, and 2 other men whose names Elias did not catch. What he caught was the name of a company, a name he had heard only once before, years ago, when Rosalind had been reading through documents late at night, and had said it aloud the way people say things that bother them not quite to themselves, not quite to anyone else. The name appeared in her folder. It appeared in the conversation behind the ventilation grate. And it appeared, Elias understood with a cold and precise clarity, in the financial structures that were quietly draining the company's community development funds into accounts that did not appear on any public filing. He was still processing this when a man in a black security jacket stepped around the corner and stopped. "You're not supposed to be in this corridor," the man said. "I was looking for the staff exit." The man took 2 steps forward, and Elias felt the calculation that happens when a person decides to be afraid and then decides not to be. He held his ground. A hand reached toward his jacket pocket. Adelaide Monroe appeared at the end of the corridor. She had been looking for Clinton to drag him back to the preview floor. She had not expected to find Elias Warren against a wall with a security contractor's hand on his arm. "That's enough," she said. The security man looked at her, recalculated, and stepped back. Elias looked at Adelaide. He did not look relieved. He looked like a man who had been in the middle of a thought and had not finished it. "You think this company is being run from the 48th floor," he said. His voice was even and unhurried. "It isn't. It's being hollowed out from the basement." Adelaide stood at the end of the corridor for a moment after he walked away. The city hummed through the walls. Somewhere behind her, a waiter's tray clinked against a marble surface. She did not say anything. 3 days later, Bernice Hale called the meeting. The room was the largest of the private conference suites, and by the time Elias arrived last, because the building's parking attendant had been instructed to hold his credentials for verification, there were 9 people seated around the table. 2 were board members. 3 were senior legal advisors. Finn Mercer sat near the window with the proprietary ease of someone who had never once sat in a chair and wondered if he belonged in it. Clinton Voss was at the far end, composed and watchful, the way a person is watchful when they are listening for the moment to speak. Elias sat down. No one offered him water. Finn Mercer looked at him and said something quiet to the man beside him. The man laughed. Elias did not look at either of them. Bernice opened the sealed folder and read. She read for 7 minutes. She did not rush. She read the founding charter provisions, the trust instrument, the activation criteria, the verification documentation, the chain of legal custody, the notation from George Monroe's own attorney stating that the arrangement had been constructed specifically to protect foundational contributors from the eventual expansion of institutional power. She read the name Rosalind Warren 11 times, in the context of original authorship, professional contribution, protected equity, and prior suppression from the company's official documentation. She read the name Elias Warren once, at the end, and set the folder down. As of this morning's final verification, she said, Elias Warren holds 50% of Monroe Urban Mobility's founding equity, with associated rights as specified in the trust instrument. Finn Mercer said, "This is ridiculous." His voice had the pitch of a man trying to sound confident while the ground tilts. Elias did not look at him. He looked at Adelaide. She looked like she was somewhere a great distance away from the room. Her face had not collapsed. Adelaide Monroe's face did not collapse, but there was something behind her eyes that had never been visible there before. It was the expression of a person who has been looking in one direction for their entire life, and has just been told that everything of consequence was happening behind them. Elias spoke for the first time since sitting down. His voice was the same as it always was in difficult moments, quiet and entirely present. "If my wife built the system that this company runs on," he said, "I'd like to know why her name is not in a single document, a single history, or a single corridor of this building." No one answered. Clinton looked at his hands. When the meeting ended, Adelaide found Elias in the parking structure on level 2. She had walked fast to get there, which was not like her. She was usually ahead of things. She had been behind this for a very long time. "I owe you an apology," she said. Elias was unlocking his car. He did not stop what he was doing, not just for the other night, she continued. For the entire, she stopped. She tried again. "I had been raised to look at people a certain way, by their function, by their category, by their relationship to the structures I was familiar with. I had never seriously questioned whether that was right." She paused. That was wrong. He looked at her for the first time since she had come through the door. "What hurt Lily," he said, "wasn't a woman having a bad night. It was a woman who believed completely that what she was doing was normal. That's a harder thing to apologize for, because it took years to build." Adelaide did not argue with that. "I'm not interested in punishment. Elias said. "I'm not interested in taking this company over or watching anyone crawl. What I'm interested in is making sure that what Rosalind built is acknowledged, that the people who are being cheated in the lower divisions stop being cheated, and that whatever Clinton Voss has been doing is brought into the light in a way that cannot be covered over. You'd need my cooperation for that," she said. "I know. I'm offering it." He looked at her carefully. "I'm not helping you keep your position," he said. "I'm helping this company stop being what Rosalind was afraid it would become." Adelaide drove home that night and stood at her floor-to-ceiling window for a long time, looking at the city she had always looked at from exactly this height. She had never once thought to go down. She went down the next morning. Elias met her at the fleet operations level at 6:45, before any executive had ever been known to arrive. He took her through the driver break room, the vehicle maintenance bay, the dispatch station where the overnight crew changed shifts. He did not narrate. He simply moved through the spaces and let her look. She saw a man asleep in a chair with his jacket pulled over his face because there was no cot. She saw a whiteboard listing the previous month's penalty deductions from pay, formatted as if they were standard procedure. She saw a bathroom with a broken lock and a handwritten sign that had been there long enough that the paper had yellowed. She saw the faces of people who had calibrated their expectations down to the level that the institution had set for them, and had stopped expecting anything else. She said nothing. Elias had expected her to say nothing. That was the appropriate response. They spent 3 evenings reviewing documents in a small room that Bernice made available to them, not a formal office, but a room with a whiteboard and a lock on the door. On the second evening, Lily fell asleep in the corner chair around 10 o'clock, her head tilted against the armrest and her shoes still on. Adelaide did not make a production of it. She quietly folded her blazer and placed it over the child's shoulders. Lily woke an hour later and looked up at Adelaide without fear or hostility. Children who had been raised by people like Elias had a particular quality. They evaluated people not by their clothes or their title, but by whether or not those people were honest in small moments. "You're the one from that night," Lily said. "The one who made my dad sad." Adelaide looked at her. "Yes," she said. Lily considered this. "He's still a good person," she said. "In case you didn't know, it was not forgiveness. It was not an absolution. It was simply a statement of fact delivered by an 8-year-old who had never seen any reason to soften the truth." Adelaide felt it the way she had not felt the apology she had prepared, because this was not something she could prepare for. This was just what was true. By the 4th evening, they had enough. Clinton Voss had been routing funds from the Community Transit Grant Program through 3 intermediary entities, 2 of which shared registration addresses with a holding company controlled by a cousin of his wife. The scheme had been running for 4 years. The amount was not modest, and Clinton had scheduled the announcement of the company's newest green initiative, a gala that would happen in 4 days, as the occasion to finalize the last major transfer, taking advantage of the goodwill and distraction that large public events reliably generated. "If we handle this privately," Elias said, "his attorneys will negotiate something quiet within 6 months. There'll be a settlement, a non-disclosure. He'll be somewhere else doing the same thing." Adelaide looked at the documents spread across the table. "You want to do this at the gala?" "He chose the gala," Elias said. "He chose the audience. The gala at the Imperial Hotel, the same Imperial Hotel, the same red carpet, the same cluster of photographers, was larger than the previous event. More press, more investors, a live, audiovisual component, beamed to 16 remote participants. Clinton Voss took the stage at 8:43 and began his remarks about transparency and the company's commitment to sustainable urban futures. The main presentation screen changed. It changed to a document spreadsheet with the first wire transfer, then the second. Then a grid of shell company registrations cross-referenced with known affiliates. Then a series of internal email excerpts in which Clinton had directed a junior accountant to reclassify disbursements as operational expenses. Then the names of the grant programs that had been diverted, and the neighborhoods they were supposed to have served, and the number of residents who had been waiting for the transit improvements that had never come. The room did not immediately understand what it was seeing. Then it did. Elias walked in through the side entrance, wearing the same driver's uniform he had worn the night he had been told where he stood. He had considered wearing something different. He had decided against it. He walked to the stage while the room was still making the transition from confusion to comprehension. He picked up the second microphone. Clinton Voss had stopped speaking and was looking at the screen with the expression of a man who was watching a fire he started spread toward his own house. "A few weeks ago," Elias said, "someone in this room told me that a person like me only needs to remember where he stands." He looked out over the audience, the board members, the investors, the journalists, the shareholders, the people who had left, the people who had looked away. That person was right about one thing. A person should always know where they stand. I stand here because my wife built the foundation of this company, and her name was erased from its walls. I stand here because the people who drive these vehicles and maintain these routes have been having money taken from their pay envelopes while their break rooms fall apart. And I stand here because a man on this stage tonight was planning to steal from the communities this company was built to serve. And he chose this room and this occasion to do it. Adelaide Munro walked out from the other side of the stage and stood beside him. She did not take a microphone. She simply stood there, which communicated more than a microphone would have. Clinton Voss attempted to signal someone in the booth to cut the feed. Nothing was cut. Bernice Hale had arrived 30 minutes earlier with a letter from the State Financial Authority and a forensic IT consultant who had taken control of the venue's system feeds at 8 o'clock. 2 investigators entered the room from the rear doors. Finn Mercer, standing near the bar, had gone the color of old marble. His father's name appeared on page 11 of the documentation, in connection with a subsidiary that had received a consulting fee it had not earned. The photographs taken in the following minutes showed many things. They showed Clinton Voss being escorted toward the service exit. They showed the audience's faces, caught between shock and the slow, particular discomfort of people who realized that they were in the wrong room all along. And they showed a man in a driver's uniform standing at the center of a stage that had been built for people who looked nothing like him, looking entirely at ease. In the weeks that followed, Monroe Urban Mobility did not collapse. It restructured. 2 board members resigned. Clinton Voss was referred for criminal prosecution. The forensic audit ran for 6 weeks and recovered documentation that closed 3 additional exposure points nobody had been looking for. The company's public standing took a short and sharp decline, then began to recover as the reforms became visible. Bernice Hale presented Elias with a formal proposal from the board. They offered him the interim co-executive role, consistent with his equity position. He declined. What he accepted was a newly created position, Director of Operational Ethics and Labor Standards. The role carried a seat on the board's oversight subcommittee, veto power over any policy affecting frontline employees, and a mandate to conduct quarterly reviews of compensation, working conditions, and grievance systems across all divisions. At the vote confirming Adelaide Munro's continued tenure as CEO, Elias cast the deciding vote in her favor. The conditions were public and specific. Rosalind Warren's name would appear in the company's official history, in its founding documentation, and on a permanent recognition installation in the lobby of the main building. The driver break rooms would be renovated within 6 months. The bonus and incentive structures would be restructured to eliminate the punitive deductions that had been quietly embedded in standard policy. And the Community Transit Grant Program would be reinstated, with an independent oversight committee that included no current employees of Monroe Urban Mobility. After the vote, Adelaide found him in the small waiting area adjacent to the boardroom. "Why did you keep me here?" she asked. Elias considered the question the way he considered most things, without hurry. "Because this company doesn't need another upheaval," he said. "It needs someone who knows what they did wrong and is capable of doing the work of being different. That's a harder qualification to find than a clean resume." She nodded. She did not say thank you. He had not asked for her gratitude, and she understood that now. Spring came to the city with the tentative quality of something that has been away for a long time and is not entirely sure of its welcome. The lindens along the park's east path had turned the particular green that Chicago only manages for about 6 weeks a year before the heat flattens everything into summer. Elias and Lily were sitting on a bench near the playground when Adelaide arrived with a folder of documents and a small cardboard box from the bakery 2 blocks east of the company's offices. The folder contained the final materials for the Rosalind Warren Foundation, a scholarship program for children of frontline transit workers, the first grants to be awarded in the fall. The bakery box contained 4 small pastries, which Lily assessed with scientific seriousness before selecting one. Adelaide sat down on the other end of the bench. She had developed a new habit since the gala. She sat before she spoke. It was a small thing, but it was real. "I want to say something," she said. "Not because I expect anything from it, but because I think it deserves to be said plainly." She looked at the park and not at either of them. "What I said to you that night was not a momentary lapse. It came from something I had been building for years, without examining it. I'm sorry for the harm it caused. I'm sorry for what Lily saw. And I'm sorry for all the years before that night when your wife's work was being used without acknowledgement." Elias looked at the lindens. "There are things you can't undo," he said. "You can only build forward from them. I'm trying to." "I know." Lily finished her pastry and looked at Adelaide with the direct, uncurated attention that children bring to situations that adults spend enormous energy making complicated. "Are you coming to dinner with us sometime?" she asked. Adelaide glanced at Elias. He was watching the playground with something in his expression that had not been there a year ago, not happiness exactly, but the absence of a particular kind of tension, like a room where a window has been opened for the first time in a long winter. "Maybe sometime," Adelaide said. Lily nodded, as if the matter were settled. The city moved around them the way cities do, indifferent to individual stories, hosting all of them simultaneously. Cabs and delivery trucks, and a Monroe urban mobility bus that ran 2 minutes ahead of schedule because someone on the overnight team had recalibrated the route the previous Tuesday. Somewhere in the building 6 blocks north, on the lobby wall beneath the main entrance directory, workers were finishing the installation of a bronze placard. It bore the name Rosalind Warren, and beneath it, in smaller letters, the words Times, Foundational Systems, Architect Times, and the year she had worked, and the words Times, whose contribution shaped this company from the beginning. Asterisk. Elias did not go to see it that afternoon. He had already seen the proof copy. He would go another day, on an ordinary morning, when there was no ceremony and no audience, when the lobby was just a lobby and the name on the wall was simply the truth returned to the place it had always belonged. He walked back to the car with Lily's hand in his, and for the first time in 4 years, he did not feel the weight of what he was carrying. He felt only the familiar texture of her small fingers, and the sound of the city, and something quiet and unhurried, beginning in the distance, not arrival, not conclusion, but the particular quality of a door left open by someone who has decided, at last, to stop pretending it was never there.